Today we have an article from Rand Paul Review. It says, "The United Globalist Nations." Share this post if you believe we should abolish the UN. Yeah, in fact, I'll talk about it because I definitely think we should abolish the UN. In 2015, GOP Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky was talking to a group of Second Amendment supporters in New Hampshire. When the topic of the United Nations came up, Paul, with his trademark candor, cut to the chase. "I dislike paying for something that two-bit third world countries with no freedom who attack us and complain about the United States," Paul said. "There's a lot of reasons why I don't like the UN, and I think I'd be happy to dissolve it." Right? He is his father's son, and that's a good thing. Ron Paul not only advocated for the end of the UN, but the end of foreign aid for decades, because all we do is prop up dictators in third world countries. We bribe them essentially to do what we want. But maybe we shouldn't waste this kind of money. We have to pay a lot of taxes for these things called foreign aid. And then our politicians sometimes get kickbacks, right? When that money's spent in other ways. It says here, Paul went on to say that the U.S. pays for a huge chunk of the UN's out-of-control spending, which includes millions of dollars in cash handouts to help feed, transport, and house people headed for the U.S. border. We're literally funding our own invasion, right? Who will attempt, and some of those people, not all of them, but a few of them, will attempt to vote illegally, right? And that's according to the Center for Immigration Studies. So, you might check them out if you get a chance. UN budgets millions for US-bound migrants in 2024, right? We are funding our own invasion indirectly. Amazing. Why would the UN give millions of dollars to support illegal immigrants coming to the US? Could it have something to do with the World Economic Forum and the UN signing a strategic partnership framework in 2019? Yes. Globalists may have been good at being subtle in times past, but not anymore. Right? Klaus Schwab, as it mentions in the next paragraph, he's not subtle, right? He helped write a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. You can find it on Amazon. The communists aren't playing anymore. They're not pretending. They actually are so inept, so ignorant, so naive that they think that other people will support their ideologies and their 15-minute cities. And some naive people might, but the majority of us should not. Why would I want to support this Great Reset, as it mentions in this article, right? From Imprimis, or Imprimis, I believe is it might be closer to the Latin pronunciation. I probably got it wrong. But it says here, what is the Great Reset? I mean, it's certainly not a good thing. You want to live in a 15-minute city where the government manages your meat intake, where the government, I don't know if you've seen these online, but they have these roads that make it more difficult to drive. You have to swerve basically in and out of bike traffic. The aim is to make traffic slower so that driving a car is so frustrating that you don't want to do it at all. And then that is supposed to solve climate change. The John Kerrys of the world who love showing up at the WEF, they well, on their private jets, for the love of God, they just don't think we should be able to pollute at all. Well, they pollute all willy-nilly, right? As much as they'd like. It's pretty ridiculous. And, it says here, is the Great Reset a conspiracy theory imagining a vast left-wing plot to establish a totalitarian one-world government? This guy says, no, I'm not so sure. Despite the fact that some people may have spun conspiracy theories based on it, with some reason, as we will see, the Great Reset is real. And this article goes through it a bit. It's pretty good. I like this stuff from Hillsdale College, even though I don't always agree with every aspect of it. I think it's useful. And down here, he says, pretty straightforward, where's the sentence? Well, this one says, for years after Florida's book was published at the 2019 annual meeting, Klaus Schwab declared, what we want in Davos this year is to push the reset button. And subsequently, the image of reset button would appear on the WEF's website, right? You could read all the nonsense on the website, and then they deleted a lot of it because it was ridiculous, right? It's really a suggestion that the Western world be more like China, and China is evaluating absolutely everything you do and giving you a social credit score. That's part of the Great Reset process as well, where the government will say, hey, we're not happy with the fact that you criticize the state. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop your access to public transportation. We're going to stop your access to grocery stores and other terrible things. And if you go out of out of the little box we've confined you to, you're going to go to the gulag. And that's what they're doing in China. They're sending the Falun Gong to the gulag. They're sending a lot of other people to the gulag as well. Anyone who speaks out against their communist nonsense. It says, and also for obvious reasons, fresh fodder for conspiracy theorists. Like, I don't know why this guy keeps saying that, since he says, hey, this stuff is true, and then he says the people that complain about it are conspiracy theorists. Don't blame me for the latter. All I'm doing is relating the historical facts, right? They've collaborated with a number of people. You know, it's also just a bunch of nonsense. And he finally admits it here, late in the paragraph. The Great Reset, this is the sentence I was looking for. The Great Reset aims to usher in a bewildering economic amalgam. Schwab's stakeholder capitalism, which I have called corporate socialism. So he admits it. An Italian philosopher, Giorgio Agamben, has called it communist capitalism. Well, that phrase is kind of a misnomer, I think, to say it that way. Because if you think about what the word fascism means, fascio means trade unions, trade unionist, and it's the objective of fascism is to get unions to take over the country and use them to run the economy, right? Terrible people like Noam Chomsky calls himself an anarcho-syndicalist. That's actually a similar ideology. Most people wouldn't believe me in saying Noam Chomsky is closer to a fascist, since he criticizes fascism all the time. But if you want to take over the government and force everyone else to live the way you say, then, you know, socialism, communism, fascism, syndicalism, these are all part of their ideology. So stakeholder capitalism is what they teach in public schools. It's what they teach even in business programs now. It's why you can meet people, and I know a few myself, who have MBAs who think that socialism is not that big of a deal. It's not a bad idea. They think that socialism is welfare programs, which couldn't be further from the truth, right? Otto von Bismarck created the welfare state, and he was not a socialist. But anyways, it says, in brief, stakeholder capitalism involves the behavioral modification of corporations to benefit not state shareholders, but stakeholders, right? So it's in total opposition to the free market capitalist Milton Friedman, right? Friedman supported the idea that that the purpose of a company was to pursue profits, but that you should do it within three major things that they don't mention in the business schools even, which is that, well, I did as a teacher, but many people don't, is that you're supposed to pursue profits within your personal ethical standards, legal standards, and social standards, right? Like, what's wrong with that? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Stakeholder capitalism, if you could even call it capitalism, is the idea that your company is supposed to not really be concerned with profits at all. In fact, you're supposed to be an NGO, and you're supposed to push for climate change issues and sustainable development, which means you're really supposed to, you know, be more in line with government standards. You're supposed to follow what the government says and not focus on anything else. And it says here, but also rethinking corporations' commitments to already vulnerable communities within their ecosystems. This is the social justice aspect of the Great Reset. And, who's mentioned social justice? We have an article coming out in a few weeks on my D-Schooled Substack, which talks about how in Mein Kampf, he talks about social justice. Adolf was a huge advocate for social justice. And what do those jerks do? They always paint themselves as victims, right? That's what they do. They paint themselves as victims, and then they advocate for social justice. Really, it's just a sneaky way of pushing a victimhood ideology, which helps give them power, right? As James Lindsay says, they call everything racist and sexist until they control it. That's part of their strategy. And they're trying to go global now through the United Nations. They're using social justice, ESG, as it says here, which finally there is some people turning against ESG. But, right-wingers, right-wing libertarians, right-wing conservatives, and moderates, maybe even a few moderate liberals, need to speak out against this stuff. This isn't part of those people's ideology. It's extreme leftist, right, stuff, Socialism is always bad. And globalism is always bad. You don't want a one-world government. That's a terrible idea. Why would the UN give millions of dollars to support illegal immigrants? We already read that part. According to WF press release, the UN Foreign Partnership was signed in a meeting held at United Nations headquarters between U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, I probably said that wrong, and and Schwab to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Who makes these plans, right? these big government plans, right? Mao Zedong, he had his 5-year plans. How many millions of people did he kill, right? And no one talks about the socialist policies that killed hundreds of thousands, millions in Africa in the second half of the 20th century. Like, and it's terrible stuff, but they engaged in some terrible ideologies, trying to control farming, yeah, and so on. But I'm not going to get into Lysenkoism here. That would be a whole nother video. But that's kind of like eugenics, but for plants instead of people. And it's quite a disgusting ideology. The phrase sustainable development is code for globalization. You haven't been paying attention if that sounds like a conspiracy theory. And if you give a hoot about personal freedom and self-determination, you better start paying attention right now. The partnership identifies 6 areas of focus. The press release continued: financing the 2030 agenda, climate change, health, digital cooperation, gender equality, empowerment of women, which is going to be difficult since these people can't define what a woman is, right? If Matt Walsh showed up and asked them, hey, what is a woman? They wouldn't know what the heck to say. Education, right? But public education is going downhill, particularly in the United States. Skills to strengthen and broaden their combined impact by building on existing and new collaborations. The Department of Education is a total failure, and that's a federal level. Clearly, we don't want education controlled by a bunch of socialists, right? Climate change, really, that's just about control, and there's nothing useful there, and so on and so forth. James Lindsay writes here, abolish the UN, because they are shooting for population control. I mean, what do these people watch? Marvel movies and take some strategies from Thanos, right? Thanos wanted to eliminate half the population in order to achieve utopia. Like the guy's a socialist or a fascist, basically. So they want to dramatically reduce the population. But as Jordan Peterson has pointed out in the past, it looks like population is going to start shrinking anyways, and we don't need to accelerate that, or it's going to cause major problems. It seems to me people need to be having more children, not less, but they won't pursue that. So it's the large global organizations pursue the opposite, and it's a bit worrisome in that case. So, and this Mises Institute has some better articles. He says, they say, forget the Human Rights Council. Why not leave the entire UN? And this article is from 2018, but it's still pretty relevant, and you'll find out why in a second. It says, the Trump administration recently announced that the U.S. will withdraw from the United Nations Human Rights Council. Their justification is that the councils consist of human rights violators such as Cuba, China, and Venezuela, and has demonstrated a bias against Israel. Right? Well, we know Cuba has terrible human rights. We know China does. They put you in the gulag if you don't go along to get along, right? If you're the Falun Gong, they call you a terrorist because you have, I don't know, strict eating habits, and then they use you as organ donors. It's disgusting, and we're not standing up for that enough or complaining about that enough, I don't think. And then Venezuela today, right now, people are revolting because they can't hold proper elections, right? Maduro became popular because he said he would just go after the rich people. There's videos of him going into cities and pointing at buildings and saying, we're going to confiscate that, and we're going to confiscate that, and we're going to confiscate that, and pointing at them physically while he's on his little soapbox. And we see what happened as a result of that. That the socialists never only take rich people's stuff, they take everyone's stuff, right? They take everyone's property. They try to take over every industry. With the socialists in the 20th century, they took over all aspects of farming and tried to control that. And the result was mass starvation, massive starvation, horrible, horrible stuff. And they just don't care because their main objective is that utopia, and they actually believe that they can create that on Earth, which is unbelievably cultish. It's very weird. And then it says here, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley took to the page of the Wall Street Journal to further expand on the decision, writing, after more than a year of unsuccessful efforts to fix these fundamental defects, the U.S. delegation announced Tuesday our withdrawal from the council. Our country will no longer be party to this deeply flawed institution which harms the cause of human rights more than it helps it. You know what? Let's follow Ron Paul's advice and maybe consider becoming non-interventionist. Why don't we leave the UN and the WEF and all these terrible organizations, the IMF, the World Bank, they're useless and they just aim to control regular people. They want governments that work more like the one in China where people have no rights. So, anyways, thanks for following. You know, if you disagree, you leave a comment. If you agree, maybe consider sharing this stuff or liking it. I appreciate you listening.